Hi, everybody. This is group number 1 with Diana, Javier, and Alfonso. And we're going to be covering chapter 28, which is Writing for Impact. The objective of this chapter is to write a compelling evaluation report that convince readers of the findings and promote taking action in response. There are 3 components that we're going to be talking about today in the first section, which is the message, the audience, and the medium. Starting with the message, the core, that would contain the core message. So it's the findings, the options and recommendations that you have for your report for the reader, including the methodology as well. So it's very important that you keep this report to the facts, obviously, the findings, what you found based on the data and the evaluation report. It must include something that the group that you're providing this evaluation for has not already known. And then it must be reasonable, it must be concise. Options and recommendations, it's very important that you offer that maybe you want to change the phrasing to options for improvement as opposed to recommendations, so people might respond better to that. It's good to be practical and give lots of options for the reader. In terms of the methodology, it's very good to describe the whole approach utilized, discuss the shortcomings that you found yourself in the report. It's better that you point them out yourself than somebody else finds them and you haven't addressed them. But don't get too carried away. Just stick to the fact. In terms of the audience, it's you're focusing, your audience is going to be composed of thought leaders and then some other people that might be reading the report as well. Thought leaders are considered those people that are influential. So for example, people refer to them as the movers and shakers. So this would usually refer to CEOs, CFOs, board members, and an association, just key stakeholders mainly. There are different ways to communicate the report to them. You can directly email them, and we'll talk a little bit about proper formats in a little bit, but it's very important that you send it to them and that they have proper access to the report. For other people, other interested persons, you could simply, by publishing this type of report, making it available online at a website with a link, you'll be able to reach additional interested persons. The medium, this is the way that you communicate. There are six basic formats that are important to cover. One of them is referred to as the MOM test summary. Then there is the killer paragraph, the outline, the 2-page report, and the technical report. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on each one of them. So when it comes to the MOM report, this is a funny way of putting it, but it makes a lot of sense. So if you had to answer, let's say you're having a conversation with somebody and you tell them, well, I just finished this evaluation report. It would be the answer to, oh, what was it about? And so it would be kind of like your short answer, very concise, very focused about what kind of report it was. So an example would be, well, we conducted an evaluation on after-school programs, and the findings suggest that children that have access to tutoring more frequently than once a week are improving their math scores by a certain percentage. So that's an example. In terms of the killer paragraph, that needs to be a compelling, concise paragraph. So it's very focused, findings and recommendations. You have to limit the methodology and just be really concrete, stick to the facts, numbers, those kinds of findings, prioritize the findings as well. And it's very important to never exceed about a third of the page with this killer paragraph. Regarding the outline, it really helps. It's more for the reader to kind of have a guidelines of how to write the entire evaluation report. So it's really the structure of the paragraph. So when you're writing your outline, you can either do sentence outline, which is full sentences that later can become your paragraphs. If you add additional information, and then your topic or a topic outline, which is just kind of like bullet points so they can guide you. Then we also want to talk about the 2-page summary, executive summary. It must be the most important part of the study. It really talks about key findings, recommendations, but the beauty of this two-page executive summary is kind of like the short version of your full report, something that people can easily go through and decide whether they want to get more details from the full report. So it's kind of like the summarized version of that. Then there's also the 10-page report, which is kind of like making the full report available in 10 pages for people to access easily. It does cover the same information, the background, the recruitment, your methodology, findings, and recommendations. There's also the technical report, which is considered the full report. You want to make sure that you cover some key things on this one, and you want to make sure that it is the information that it's concise, but yet it includes everything. So in terms of writing style, you want to make sure that you write for impact. These are reports that people in associations are going to be reading, organizations, etc., maybe the government. And so people tend to read fast and kind of skim through to see where the main key points are, and you want to make that available to them in an easy way. An example is via the layout and the typography. So for example, using different fonts for titles, bold, highlighted, those kinds of things make it easier for the reader to pinpoint where that important information, or how you're kind of strategizing your full report. One thing that is very important to point out there is that you don't want to overdo it. So you should just highlight things with fonts and or highlighting, but never overuse it, because then the reader is going to just get confused. In terms of using graphs, tables, and other large graphics, these are very useful to understand pieces of information, for example, findings, and so they can be very useful. Just make sure that you keep those graphics simple. For example, standard graphs with bars, lines, and or slices. Those are very useful. Make sure that they're marked correctly, and that you have tables and graphs that are large enough for people to read and understand. In terms of power writing, that's an area where you really want to bring in the eye to the report. You can use color, but always keep in mind though that people can easily print your report. If it has a lot of color, it could be printed in black and white, and you might lose some of that valuable contrast, for example, in the graphs. So always test your report by changing it to black and white and see if that would still make sense if it was printed that way. Always provide the report in a format that cannot be altered. So for example, a PDF file would be great, because that way if people print it, it's not going to change the fonts if they don't have them in their computers, or it may not change the graphs and change it to a different area of the report where it doesn't make any sense and it loses its value. Presentations are a very good component of providing an evaluation report. Just make sure that you keep things to a focused way. There is a 6-slide limit when you're doing a presentation, no more than 5 items per slide, so that you don't lose that font size that is going to make it easy for the reader to follow. If you do have other things to add, you can do that by providing handouts so that people can refer to. Just make sure that, again, they can be printed in black and white and not lose their value on that. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Javier, who's going to be expanding on impact statement.
Thank you, Diana. Well, the impact statement is a short document that explains the significance of your research work. So in other words, you have to explain why are you doing this research and how are you doing it. So researchers or students have to use impact statements to answer questions related to the impact of their research on their current knowledge in the field or socioeconomic environmental outcome. The impact statement is used to inform and convince different stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are often people that are in charge of allocating the funds, the ones that are literally paying for you to do the investigation. It can be university administrators, grant program facilitators, or government policymakers. Therefore, it justifies why the research needs to be done in their current research or pursue a new area of interest. So it's always, you always have to work with a stakeholder because they're the ones that technically are paying for your investigation to be done. So this impact of statement has actually 5 points. They're really important, which is a clear description of the issue of the problem that your research address. Often you can adopt the problem statement for your recent published articles or consequent presentations. Number 2 is a statement of the action you're taking or intend to take to resolve the problem. Remember, you always have to find why are you doing it and how you're gonna encounter some problems. Explain to the stakeholders, and not only to the stakeholders, to the readers also. So number 3 is the explanation of the impact. This is the most important part of the impact statement. You need to describe clearly who benefits from your work and in what ways. You can focus on multiple different levels of benefit, individuals, organizational, community or social benefit, as well as benefit for the research, for the community. Number 4 is a list of the people who are involved in the research. You always have to be working with someone else. If you're using data, for example, that it was done already, so you have to be listing the information, where you obtain the information. If you're conducting some type of research, it's always really important to list those individuals. And the last one, but not least, is your name and contact information, and sometimes a brief description of your background and involvement on the project. So with that, I'm gonna pass it with Alfonso. He's now everything has to go to writing. Alfonso is gonna explain this.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Like Javier said, eventually we're all going to have to put our evaluation and our findings into writing. So here are some practical guides that can help you draft a readable and professionally constructed program evaluation with impact. Number 1, make sure that less is more. So we advise that your paragraphs are no more than 5 short, compact sentences. Number 2, and this is very important, is avoid writing in a passive voice. So what's a passive voice? Here's kind of a definition that I like to go by. A passive construction of a sentence occurs when you make the object of an action into the subject of the sentence. So here's an example. The grant application was approved by the Livestock Association. That's passive. And this is the active voice in a sentence. The Livestock Association approved the grant. So you see how the verbs are flipped in the sentences. So that's kind of how you know when you're writing in subject and passive voice. And also active voice tends to be less wordy than passive voice sentences. And then you guys have to, like how we talked about earlier, my colleagues talked about earlier, we're working on measuring program impact. So try to avoid these types of words or phrases that do not show impact. They just show possibility or extension of our work, could impact, potentially, provides a new opportunity, can help, could result. There, you're not showing any impact. You're just saying what can happen in the future. Now, if your evaluation is done right, and you're going to write for impact, then these are the phrases that you should use in your evaluation report. Impacted by, helped by, resulted in, eliminated, improved, demonstrated, enabled, and saved. And there's among others that you guys can expand on in your writing. Again, eventually you guys are going to have to come down and write the report. And that's the deal breaker, because if you can't put your argument or your findings in writing, then all the hard work you put into an evaluation won't be appreciated, and maybe not even considered worthy of some type of validity for the stakeholders. And that's our presentation.
Thank you so
We
much.
hope that you enjoyed our presentation from Group 1, and we look forward to commenting on yours.